Okay, we will call the June 10th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Can we please have the roll call?
Andre Spinelli.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here.
Radhika Krishna.
Here.
Jim Winchester.
Here.
Scott Pullis.
Here.
Jeff Ron.
Here.
Brandy Eber.
Here.
Daniel George.
Here.
Greg Strike.
Here.
You have a quorum. Thank you.
Are there any disclosures from the commissioners? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Strike, seconded by Commissioner Winchester. Anyone wishing to pull anything for discussion? Seeing none, are any objections? Hearing none, consent agenda is approved. Moving on to unfinished business, the first case on our agenda is 2024-0067. Their staff presentation. The public hearing has been closed, but I expect we will hear from staff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Davis, Planning Department. The Planning and Zoning Commission on Friday received by email supplementary recommendations from the Planning Department on case 67, the Home Initiative Comprehensive Plan Amendments, as well as the subsequent case. As well, the Planning and Zoning Commission received a cheat sheet of draft findings of fact. The supplementary recommendations memos provide starter language for making a motion to approve the public hearing draft home ordinances subject to a list of recommended amendments. So you see that in your memo. It shows 7 recommended amendments to the public hearing draft home initiative comprehensive plan amendments. These are refined recommendations based on the original staff reports and the additional comments and commission deliberations since then, since the staff report. The amendments that are shown on there, the commissioners can move to strike those or amend those. But the idea is that they would be attached to the main motion for recommending approval. The memo also includes, in the event the commission were to instead move towards postponement, the end of the memo provides language that would support that kind of decision. Again, a postponement with those, recommending that those 7 changes, those 7 amendments, 1 through 7, be made, and then the ordinance returned to the commission. During the development of the memos, the Planning Department met with the sponsor's staff aide for the Home Initiative Ordinance 4 times and discussed issues that seem to be remaining to be resolved in the ordinances, potential findings of fact. We discussed arranging the sponsor's review and comment on the supplementary recommendations. The Commission has essentially several options for action. I think we mentioned that in the email that we sent to the Commission on Friday. But those four options are also on the memorandum you received for the subsequent case, Home Initiative 006. But those same four options apply to this case, which is recommend approval as written, recommend approval subject to amendments, which is how the supplementary recommendations memo is written, recommend denial, and fourthly, postpone action until a revised draft ordinance can be returned to the commission. Those are the fundamental choices for the commission this evening. And with that, I can take any questions. Thank you.
Question from Commissioner Krishna.
Sure, I'll kick things off and direct a question to staff, which is that during your meetings with the sponsors between our last meeting and this one of the questions that was raised at our last meeting was which of the comprehensive plan amendments were strictly necessary for the passage of the home initiative and which were additional changes made by the preference of the sponsors. I'm wondering if that came up and if you have an answer to that question.
Yes, in general, we discussed the seeing that the comprehensive plan amendments are focused on those changes to the comp plan that are relevant and necessary for this, for the home initiative text amendments to Title 21. The recommendations, the recommended amendments to the public hearing draft comp plan amendments that are in the memo 1 through 7 speak to honing or in some cases reducing the scope of the comprehensive plan amendment to focus on what's necessary. There were, for example, in amendment number 5 on page 2 of the memorandum, refers to some changes in the public hearing draft ordinance that were proposed to some of the Anchorage 2020 and Anchorage 2040 policies that were unnecessary to support the home initiative's text amendments, and that may also be, staff believes, could be create internal inconsistencies in the comp plan. On the other side of the coin, there are amendments to the comprehensive plan that would be needed to support the text amendments to Title 21 and the home initiative that were not in the public hearing draft plan, public hearing draft ordinance. And those include the first 3 amendments on the first page of the memo, amendments to the how the neighborhood and district plans and their land use plan maps apply, amendments to the Anchorage 2040 land use plan map, and some amendments to the actions and strategies of the Anchorage 2040 land use plan. We didn't get into the specifics in our discussions with the Assembly Staff Member 8 about those, but the general concept of honing or making the scope of the comprehensive plan amendment include what was needed, but only what is needed to support the text amendments to Title 21 that have been proposed.
Thank you.
Question from Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, through the chair. Staff, thank you for your work on the cheat sheets and supplemental findings of fact, and I look forward to discussion as necessary tonight to better understand those from the Commission's perspective. My first question with respect to the proposed department recommendations or amendments for both cases. It's item number 7 on one and item number 6 on another. The language is provide a revised, more completed version of the public hearing draft home initiative, Title 21 text amendment for testing and review by the Commission and public prior to final consideration. It carries on from there. But I'm most interested in better understanding what staff's vision is for that recommendation. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. On the substantive side of that recommendation, which in the memorandum for this case, 67, appears as amendment number 7 on the second side of the memo. So the first part of that is to return a more complete version of the comprehensive plan amendment for review by the Commission and public. So a more complete version would actually show you what is the change to the land use plan map, to show you this memorandum, these kinds of recommendations provide you with the broad direction to amend the land use plan map to make it flexible enough to allow for example, the merger of the R1 and R2 zones, and somehow amending the neighborhood and district plans, or how the two relate, comp plan, neighborhood plans. But there are choices, including policy choices, on what the amendments are and how they're made. So that amendment is not in the public hearing draft. And so the first part of this recommendation is to return a revised, more complete version, and so that the Assembly can adopt what changes need to be made. The latter half of this recommendation speaks to the process for doing that. And the process that the Planning Department recommends is that before the Assembly finalizes those, that the Commission see them again. And so that the Planning and Zoning Commission can advise the Assembly on and comment on the path taken to carry out that change. So the path taken to carry out amendments 1, 2, 3, through 6. How did the Assembly, the Planning Department, and for the Commission in seeing that, to hold reopen or hold a public hearing so that the public may also provide the Commission its comments, and the Commission can hear from the public, what the public thinks about those, and as it deliberates on how to do so. The references to the American Planning Association and the International Association for Public Participation, those organizations provide general guidelines. It would be including the public in the process for deciding how to amend the comp plan, allowing the public to see and comment on what recommendations are brought forward to change the neighborhood and district plans or change the language of the comp plan. So it would give the public an opportunity to see and comment on that. There are different levels of in the range of public participation. It ranges from a variety of levels, but for significant substantive changes, these organizations recommend that there be a collaboration or at least comment by the public, so that by the time the Planning and Zoning Commission sees it, there's been a public process to carry that out. When we have looked at cities that have successfully merged as zoning districts, one of the more recent ones is the city of St. Paul. Minnesota. St. Paul adopted their merger of most of their residential zones, allowing more than one primary dwelling unit. We'll see how many, but more than one primary dwelling unit per every urban lot in residency zone in the city. And they went through a several-year process to do that. That isn't to say that this process would take that long, but it's inclusive of a public process. So I hope that's helpful without being too long-winded.
Question from Commissioner Krishna.
I suppose I want to follow up on that question and kind of ask how that recommendation is functionally different from a postponement.
The way I see it, they're not entirely different. You can almost see them very similar to one another. The postponement really would be that the commission is recommending that the assembly not see this, not move forward on this until some months from now, a while from now, when the parties can bring back to the commission this revised ordinances, and then the commission weigh in before the assembly sees it. With the recommendation for approval, subject to these changes, it's almost as though the Planning and Zoning Commission is making a policy level recommendation to the assembly, so that the assembly can move forward and take its action. And the assembly could take its action, and it could either move forward with approving the ordinances without bringing back to the commission, or it could, the assembly could, I can say what the assembly could do, but the assembly could give the same kind of policy approval and provisionally adopt, so to speak, these amendments, and that would provide the sponsors, the municipality, the direction to move forward with these, revise them, bring them back through the commission for final approval. The assembly, when it adopted the Title 21 rewrite, it conceptually approved parts of the Title 21 rewrite. Then they went back through the Planning and Zoning Commission, and a final version came back to the assembly. So there's some precedent for that kind of approach, but it would be more like a conceptual approval and to help show support and approval of the general direction while we figure out the details. Thank you.
If there are no further questions, is somebody ready to make a motion? Commissioner Ron, you have a question?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm willing to make a motion, but it's not the one that we see before us on our panels. It's one to get things started in terms of discussion, and carries back on my previous interest around postponement. So I'm willing to make a motion to the commission for postponement. We can have some discussion on that, see where it lands, and if postponement isn't the will of the body, then we can move forward with other motions.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone. Is there a second?
For purpose of discussion, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone by Commissioner Ron, seconded by Commissioner George. Commissioner Ron, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fellow commissioners, I'll try not to be too long-winded in this, but I appreciate fellow commissioners' interest in entertaining discussion at the very least. I understand that staff had met with the aide responsible for helping draft what we see before us 4 times, which to me indicates a willingness and interest in working towards closing some of the gaps that I think the Commission had discussed during the public hearing and our last meetings. That said, I personally, as Commissioner, don't see closure of some of those major items. And staff's recommendations and discussion around incomplete, my words, not the department's, is where I still see this. And while I think pushing forward something that still needs to be baked is one thing, but if it doesn't have all the ingredients necessary that the recipe calls for, that's another. So for those reasons, I do agree with the department's findings of fact and would incorporate them by reference in what I'm saying here tonight. And I fully support the department's recommendations for approval as well, and think that through an act of postponement, things can be worked to resolution through an engaging process with the public, where the community comes together to develop the solutions necessary to move us forward. For those reasons, I support the motion. Thanks.
Commissioner George.
Thank you, the Chair. I'll be very brief. I didn't necessarily wish to incorporate all of the department recommendations or findings by reference. I think I have issue with some of them. And maybe I'll just put some of those on the record here because I don't know where we'll get to tonight, and I want to have work product here that is valuable to the individuals who have worked on this, and I want them to maybe get a temperature of where we're at on things, and I want to let them know where there may be possible items of progress. And so I'm willing in good faith to do that. I would say that I am not comfortable making a finding on my behalf to recommend amending neighborhood and district plans. I think that those were put together by communities with considerable, very local input. I think that if an ordinance is to be put forward to amend the zoning or land use in those areas, that it be done so fairly on an area-wide basis and notification to all communities that may have existing plans. I would certainly like to see an opportunity for those communities to have an opportunity to open those plans up, to make them comply, or at least to consent or to be aware that that their plans are being modified. I think that would be important. Same thing goes for the 2040 land use plan. I think to just, given the extensive public process that it went through over quite a lengthy period with so many public meetings, to simply incorporate it by reference to make it comply with this ordinance seems cart before the horse, I would say. And so I'm not quite comfortable with making that recommendation here. I think that those items stand on their own, and that a notification that there is an inconsistency and that the normal process to change those things should be gone through would be something I would be more comfortable with. I'm comfortable with items 4 and 5. Not sure about item 6. And item 7, the one that Commissioner Krishna also brought up as well, about the planning process, it got me thinking. It refers to the 10-year targeted review, but we're currently operating under a 25-year-old community plan, and 2103070B1 actually says we're supposed to do a new full comp plan every 20 years. And so I'm curious why we don't have the process to do something on that level, because it seems like the reason we're here is because we're working with outdated numbers and data, and so maybe that finding is that we take a harder look at why we haven't gone through that process. And if it's a question of dollars in the budget, then I'll let those individuals who make those decisions have that conversation, but I wanted to make that finding. So, thank you. And it wasn't quite as brief as I promised, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I'm not really sure, I mean, I've struggled with what I view as the best kind of outcome in terms of process from this meeting today. I think where I stand is I'm interested in, I agree generally with the sentiments of the commissioners that have spoken thus far, and that I think there is still work that can be done with these cases. I would like to see it done. I would like to see these cases be successful. I'm just not sure if delaying is the best way to get to that as a general kind of, or postponing, motion to postpone. We've done a couple of rounds of that at this point. I'm not sure what we'll ultimately see from that, and I guess I'm just wondering, and I'm thinking maybe what makes sense to me, maybe as an outcome, is to still pass something forward, whether it's a approval or denial, and maybe as part of that we can have an opportunity to go through and provide some specific comments on some of the staff's recommendations, recommended conditions, and the proposed findings of fact, to give some specific guidance to the sponsors on that point. I don't know exactly how most efficiently to do that process, but to me it seems like that's maybe what makes sense coming out of this meeting, and I think for that reason I might not support just a general motion to postpone.
Chair, can we have a point of order?
What is the point of order?
Well, we've got the petitioner over here now with the city staff, and they are in the role of petitioner in this role.
Okay. Are they interfering with your train of thought?
Yeah, can you hear him?
I'm not. It's not bothering me.
Well, I don't think that's the point. I mean, we've never allowed the petitioner to approach the staff in this type of open forum in this matter.
I don't allow a lot of things. I'm just here. I'm not security. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? The motion to postpone. Commissioner Krishna.
I'm not sure my thoughts are entirely in one place. I think I would just say that while these cases hang together, the approval criteria for them are very different. And I am open to postponement on this particular case, but I would prefer that recommendations be specifically appended to that, because my intention is that the sponsors, the members of the Anchorage Assembly, already have this on their agenda tomorrow night, so I don't see the point of postponing this without providing any recommendations whatsoever that have specificity to them. I will say that, I've got my Title 21 here, and these two cases, the criteria in my mind for a comprehensive plan amendment are much higher than that for Title 21 text amendment. So I will just say that I am viewing this case in front of us with slightly more caution than our subsequent case. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else.
Tom?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The sponsors have provided information in response to the staff supplementary memorandum, and for both cases, and have one is a revised version of the recommendations, which shows track changes to that, including to change it to joint supplementary recommendations of the department and the sponsors. The second is a memorandum from the sponsors providing information about which of the recommendations that the sponsors concur with, which they do not concur with, and the rationale for those comments. And the sponsors would like the commission to be informed and aware of that. I could say that during our meetings with the sponsors aid last week, we did have a comment opportunity for the sponsors. We received the comments, including their recommended track changes, on cases 6 and 67. The department incorporated or addressed several of those recommended changes to the department recommendations, and some we did not. But the sponsors would like for the commission opportunity to see these, and we have copies for the commission. It was the sponsors' understanding that we were to provide for the commission a joint recommendation, and it was my understanding that we were going to provide a refined department recommendation in consideration of the further meetings with the sponsors' aid. So there were differing understandings of the materials that we were to provide, who they were to be from. So I have these materials to hand out.
Okay, do we want to take a 5-minute break while staff hands out the materials and review and reconvene? 5-minute break. We will start rolling again. So we have a motion to postpone amendment to the comprehensive plan. Mr. Davis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief follow-up to what was handed out. Just to clarify that the sponsors explained to me that they intended to provide a second track change document, which was track changes version of the department supplementary recommendations for case 67. So what you received, the track change version, is for the text amendment case, the next one. But there was an equivalent one for the case 67, and unfortunately that didn't make it off the printer for this evening, but it similar, it included track changes. The main memorandum that the sponsors wanted to bring to the commissioner's attention as far as the content is the one with the big black header, which provides the sponsors' responses, or whether they concur or do not concur with the recommendations, each one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It feels like we're in a bit of an awkward position in some ways. And to me, the awkwardness is in understanding that the petitioner has put forward some track changes to department recommendations that we don't have before us. I recall this commission has previously, in other cases, asked petitioners how they feel about the department's recommendations. Could they live with recommendations in the staff packets or those amendments that we as the commission had made during our deliberations? So the feel of that, I understand, kind of, and can make peace mentally with where we're at, except for the fact that we don't have what the petitioner would like us to see. That's part A, and part B is what I do see in the other cases. Track changes I think would carry forward, specifically, I think it's item 7, around providing a revised, more completed version of the public hearing draft home initiative. Again, that's the track change version on 006, not 0067, but they're almost commensurate recommendations, and that to me indicates the petitioner's not supportive of that. Let's go out and do some more work, bring it back to the commission, engage the public. So for those two reasons, part A and part B, I stand similarly on my motion and support my motion to postpone.
Commissioner Winchester.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Commissioner Ron. Your your comments are well taken and thorough as usual. In all this, if we just kind of step back, what just occurred to us just demonstrates the fact that this is an ongoing process still and has a ways to get over in my mind, and that's why I'm supporting postponement. I think the sponsors have done a great service to the community by having this discussion move to the forefront, and all the work that they're doing to to solve a housing shortage in this town. I want to thank staff for the amount of work that they've had to respond to in order to try to mesh the vision of the home initiative with the current Title 21. I know it's been busy for both groups over the last few months, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing to make Anchorage a better place. We had public testimony last time. There was about 7 folks that testified, 4 against, or 4 for, 3 against. The dividing line for me was anyone under 40 was for this initiative, and anyone over 40 was against it. So those of us over 40 should listen to the younger crowd and the needs that they are having in our town right now. I would also acknowledge all the community council input that we received, some in person, more by writing, but a lot of the affected areas were able to weigh in, and I think most were against. So I think the process is working. I think this is a great conversation to have, and we're very close, but we're not there yet in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Krishna.
Thank you. I have a bit of a process question for staff, which is that I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding how this motion to postpone action incorporates the recommendations from the staff, 1 through 7, which are in our hands. Will they be forwarded on, or are they just general guidance for this body and for staff and for the sponsors if this comes back before us?
Yes, it depends on how, my understanding of the question is what of the numbered recommendations following the motion to either postpone or approve or whatnot. For those recommendations to really move forward in the resolution, the commission's resolution, providing its guidance as to what should change or what needs to be worked on, you would want to include those amendments or revised version of those amendments or whatever recommended amendments changes to the ordinance that the commission would recommend be made in the motion. So it would be either in the main motion to postpone or approve, or through commissioners making motions to amend the main motion to include those. So far, the main motion on the floor to postpone, I don't believe the motion itself included those. When Commissioner Ron spoke to his motion, he did say he supported them. So if you want to include them in the resolution, you would amend the main motion to say that amending the motion to include recommendations 1 through 7, or whichever recommendations you want to include. Thank you.
The language we have on our screen does say subject to the guidance, move to postpone case, subject to the guidance of amendments 1 through 7.
Well, then I stand corrected then. I didn't hear that said, so that would be, if that's what's showing on the screen is what the motion is, then it would include them.
Tom, I have another question. When we postpone, we don't typically draft a resolution, I don't believe. Am I?
You're right. I apologize.
So-
I'm thinking of the
so-
approval.
I guess I will kind of make some comments now. I came here tonight not supporting postponement, but after seeing what I see here, I think maybe the best thing for this body to do is to postpone. I don't particularly endorse all of staff's amendments or guidance, but I'm just not sure that I see a way forward on this case for us. And that's all. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Ms. Bolzano, Is that right? Did I get that?
Yes, thank you. All I was going to ask was, is there any way to get the proposed motion back on the screen so we can all see it and follow along?
So the only part you can't see is the word recommendations at the bottom. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I was just going to note, I think I had spoke earlier that I was not planning to support the motion. I think similar to the chair's comments, I think I do plan to support it now, seeing kind of the most recent materials we received. It looks like, at the very least, there's room for continued discussion between the sponsors and the planning department and kind of finalizing exactly where kind of the points of agreement and disagreement are. And I would also just wanted to note that I think it would be really helpful, and I know various commissioners have noted this before, but with respect to finding, or I guess it's not the finding, staff's recommendation number 7 on this case about having a kind of complete version of the draft, I think would be really helpful too, as part of any final review process that we go through ourselves.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote.
Ms. Eber, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
That motion passes. All right, moving on to item number 2, case 2024-0006. Can we please have staff presentation?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The same materials that you received for case 67, similar materials for case 2024-006. On Friday, you received a memorandum of supplementary staff recommendations for case 0006. They refined the department's recommendations from the original staff report of March 18th based on the deliberations on this case since that report, and they are intended to assist the commission in taking action, including potential language for approval and for approval with recommended amendments. In this case, recommended amendments number 1 through 8, amending the public hearing draft ordinance. Likewise, with the previous case, provided the commission with a cheat sheet of findings of fact. Staff wrote those findings of fact as explanation or in support explanation of the memorandum of refined supplementary staff amendments. Both documents include language that's to assist the commission. The commission may use it or revise it, strike it as it wishes. This material is the department's recommendation We did have meetings with the sponsors' aide, their staff in this case. Again, those same 4 meetings. And whenever some of these, and the sponsors have provided a track changes version of the staff memorandum that indicates to the commission with which language they would strike or from the commission's action, which they would add. And they've also provided a memorandum with a big black header that explains which parts of the staff supplementary recommendations the sponsors agree or disagree with. It was the staff's understanding that the materials, the supplementary staff report, supplementary staff recommendations that we're giving you are department recommendation. And the the sponsors did provide us with their track changes comments. Their track changes comments we received on Friday. They did lead to changes that we did make and are reflected in the memorandum, in the staff supplementary memorandum that you received on Friday, in the department recommendation amendment number 1 and number 5 attempted to respond to the track changes that the sponsors made, and the department's recommendation is to move forward with recommendation number 6, which you can find the sponsors disagreed with, as well as 7 and 8. There's a basic disagreement between the department and the sponsors regarding the nature of the rezoning. That I think would be difficult to come to yes on that understanding, but that the staff recommendations in amendments 6, 7, and 8 certainly do not reflect what the sponsors commented to us on. And we did have to indicate to the sponsors' aide when we received these on Fridays that the memo that the department's providing to the commission on Friday, that we were providing the department's recommendation, that I didn't have the scope or wherewithal to create a combined recommendation. And again, the commission has basically 4 options for action, and those are explained in the beginning of the memorandum. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I will start off with a question. One thing that I've noticed you both agree on is this comment on minimum density. Can you please explain to me what minimum density, what that refers to, or how that would be enforced?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That has to do with the recommendation. I lost track of it. Where am I? Recommendation number 3 in the supplementary memorandum, which is to include some kind of minimum residential requirement within the medium and high density replacement zones for the medium R3 and high density R4 zones within the medium and high density compact mixed residential district. So minimum residential requirement, as the staff report explained, there's different parts to that. One is that there be a requirement for there to be residential units as part of any development. So it's a mixed-use development. It includes residential units instead of just straight up, non-residential commercial. That's one piece of it. Another piece of it is that there's be a minimum number, or like you said, minimum density. So per acre, a minimum number of dwelling units per acre, so that if there's a mixed-use development, that will meet a minimum per acre requirement. And, the R4A zone, don't quote me, has a minimum density of, forget the number, I'm going to say the number, 20 dwelling units per acre. It might be something different, but.
Sounds a little low.
Well, the minimum required density sounds a little low.
I don't know of any current minimums.
Oh, so in the R4A zone, when there is a mixed-use development, my understanding, in the R3A zone as well, there's a minimum density of residential units. I believe in the R3A, again, don't quote me, is like 12 or 15 DUA.
Well, I think the R3A actually, the way it operates is 25% commercial for 75% residentials. That was my recollection. But
They include that. You are correct. So there's a minimum density, and then there's also a minimum percentage of the development. So the amount of floor area in the development, I have 100,000 square feet of floor area, a minimum percentage of that needs to be devoted to the residential side of it. So you could have two buildings, you have two 50,000 square foot buildings, one's all residential, one's all commercial, or you can mix them together. The main thing is whatever the configuration of your site is, you got to have a certain percentage of that floor area be residential, and also you have a certain minimum density of residential. Those are two ways you could go about it, or you could combine them. My understanding is they're combined, but going from memory. The other piece of it that's critical in the minimum residential requirement, as we've kind of phrased it, minimum residential requirement in 3, is that there is a requirement that the residential be built at the same time, no later than at the same time as the commercial. So you have a certain minimum amount of residential required, floor area and or density, but that minimum is met before there is a certificate of occupancy on the commercial side. The municipality learned to include that through a hard experience or two when it wasn't included, and the phase that was supposed to be residential never came. There are other pieces to that included in that amendment, but including what are the upper limits to the size of the commercial development that are, that's inside the neighborhood. But I think the 3 components of minimum residential include the density, the minimum percentage of the floor area, and that there be residential, and that be built at the same time. Thank you.
So when we're saying minimum residential, we're talking about a certain amount of residential, which then allows you to build a certain amount of commercial, and that's the minimum. Not like if you have an acre of R4, it's illegal to build one single unit on it.
Yeah, you're correct. The former of those.
Thank you. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff, my question is around Department Recommendation 8 and the misalignment that I'm sensing between the petitioners and the department's recommendation. In the large black-headed packet, bottom of the first page, although not numbered, item 8 says, an ordinance addressing this process has been introduced to the Assembly. Could you please speak to that? Is that AO45S?
Yes, I believe that's AO45. That's what they're referring to.
And if anyone else from the department would like to jump in with additional context, that would be much appreciated. Thanks.
Yes, I agree that the sponsor's memorandum is referring to AO 2024-45, which happens to be on tomorrow night's assembly agenda.
Commissioner George.
Thank you to the chair. I'm concerned procedurally that we're at the end of our 60 days with this under the code, and that the Assembly has already noticed this for tomorrow and then for public hearing, I think, on the 25th, if I'm not mistaken. And this may be our opportunity to provide meaningful input. That our motion to postpone on the previous item, subject to the staff recommendations, may simply be our input. And I don't know how particularly meaningful that may be. Another way to look at that is it's a request for the Assembly to send us a revised version. My fear is that we continually go back and forth with the sponsors in the department with potentially a new set of recommendations every meeting. And I kind of feel like we're stuck here in the middle of a negotiation between the Assembly and the department. And it's not the best public process, I think. I think we can do better. So I'm torn. You know, I almost want to go back and reconsider my vote on the previous item, just because I think many of us we've kind of come to the point where the department has sort of codified our recommendations here. And, you know, if there are recommendations and whether there's approval of the item or not, I think that information may be valuable if the Assembly is going to hear it. I've been listening to hearings going on at the other body, and there seems to be quite a sentiment regarding SLs, regarding the powers to amend Title 21. You know, we're a home rule municipality, and the powers of planning and zoning and land use regulation rest with...
Commissioner George, I wouldn't be fair to Commissioner Strike if I didn't ask you if you had a question.
My question is, I'm testing the waters here to see if, you know, given the fact that this may be our only opportunity to provide public input on this, if there's willingness to send our recommendations up to the other body, whether or not there's approval attached to it. I don't know how to take that temperature.
I think Commissioner Krishna might answer that for you.
I mostly agree with you, and I'm prepared to make a motion to approve that I think I intend to support and speak to. And I do have another question for staff, which is, at one of our meetings last year when we had omnibus amendments to approve, we had a procedure that we haven't used very often where we were able to work through a long list of amendments through a slightly more streamlined process than the one I think we're using today. And if staff could remind us how the commission might do that, and if it'd be appropriate now, that might be a easier way to work through our list of recommendations today.
Yes, I'm not familiar with the process the commission used for the omnibus amendments, other than it was a Title 21 text amendment. It followed the text amendment process, but I just wasn't present for how the commission walked through its amendments and its motions.
I think you might have recommended that we could move to, I think you called it the body of the whole or something like that? Committee of the whole, where we could speak more freely, and I wouldn't be cutting people off when they just start saying what they think without questions.
Yes, the Planning and Zoning Commission could go into a committee of the whole and discuss a list of amendments and agree informally on amendments to make or not make. And then, help me out here, Lori, if I'm not correct in this, but then you would come out of the committee of the whole You could take no action while in committee of the whole, but you would come out of the committee of the whole, and then you could make a motion to take the actions that you discussed.
Through the chair, Mr. Davis, that is correct. You will need a motion and a second to move into committee of the whole and to come back out of committee of the whole. Thank you.
Commissioner Krishna.
I make a motion to enter the committee of the whole.
Perfect. Motion to enter the committee of the whole. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Ron. Any opposed? Hearing none, we are in the committee of the whole. I'm not sure. I think that basically this means we kind of can toss out Robert's rules a little bit for the time being. I'm not positive on that, but I think you could speak more freely now. Yeah, total anarchy. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interested in any commissioner willing to champion a motion in this case. What makes sense to me is a base motion, perhaps, that we would then add to. But since we're in the committee of the whole, perhaps we can come to some sort of consensus on the entire litany of recommendations that we would want to see attached to this. Perhaps Commissioner Krishna, if you could jump in and share your vision of what you would like to see out of this.
Commissioner Krishna.
Sure. I'm hoping that we can just work through the department recommendations 1 through 8 in order and get a temperature check for if everyone is either A, comfortable with the recommendation as written, has a amendment to the recommendation that they feel strongly about, and if so, then we can hear that, maybe take an informal vote, and then move on while, of course, documenting this very well for Lori.
Okay, so we have recommendation number 1, postpone consolidation of hillside zoning districts. And the sponsor's version, delay the implementation of consolidation for a period no more than 6 months. Anybody feel strongly one way or another on those items? To me, the delaying no later than 6 months is irrelevant because all this takes many months and who knows when it'll happen. So, Commissioner Pullis.
I'll just second your comment there in that my experience with the last Title 21 change was it was very confusing for like 2 years. It took 4 years to get it kind of cleaned up. And now it's been 5 or 6 years later, and here we are changing the code again. And so I completely appreciate everything the Assembly is trying to do with this. I think it's kind of the right move, but I think it's going to cause mass confusion and more codes than everybody can deal with currently at this point. And that's why I'm kind of the opinion that I like some of these approvals, knowing that it basically puts them through the ringer and makes them go through all the stuff. I don't know what postponing does, but I agree that it's going to take more than 6 months to resolve the issues. And in the meantime, I don't know how that all plays out with current codes and the new codes going implemented immediately. It was just kind of a mess last time. That's my experience there.
Commissioner George.
This time very briefly. I do not support a postponement of this particular portion of the initiative for the reason that I believe that in order for this whole thing to come together, it is going to take time. And I think that if this initiative is good for Mountain View and Russian Jack, it's good for Rabbit Creek and Golden View. And it should be ready to be on paper for consideration by the time it's approved. So if that means it has to come back with a draft, I'm of the opinion that it shouldn't be postponed in its implementation, that the work should be done. Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you. I think, I guess I was inclined to support this particular recommendation myself, but what I'll say is maybe more just a process point is I'm wondering if it makes sense as we go through these to just identify the ones that we are all in agreement on to the extent that happens, so that when we do come to putting a motion on the table, we can already have included the ones we agree on and then could allow to then add and make specific findings and votes up or down on the ones that we're not all in agreement on. It looks like this is one that we are not in agreement on.
Okay, so anybody feel strongly in agreement with any of the recommendations? I feel strongly in agreement with number 6.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate your interest in us finding agreement. I'm stuck on the process that Commissioner Krishna laid out. If we can just work through top to bottom, perhaps any commissioners not being in agreement would look to them to speak up so that we know when we're talking about that particular recommendation that we're not in full alignment.
Commissioner Krishna.
Yes, just in terms of process, it seems like we have some differing viewpoints in number 1. I actually very much appreciate Commissioner George's viewpoint, and I would maybe ask if he has an alternate suggestion that we could maybe then consider or vote on informally, because I think we need to have something, right? It's either, do we want to recommend it as it's written, do we want to strike it completely, or do we want to substitute something else?
Thank you, Commissioner Krishna. I think this goes to the heart of the ordinance itself, that it's so large it's collapsing under its own weight. And this one's just not, it's just a placeholder, it's a title, there's nothing underneath it. And with it in here, it's not ready to move forward. So, if this is something that were to come back before us separately, it could be worked on. But, we don't have Eagle River and we don't have Girdwood in this, but somehow we have large lot residential, which is the largest land mass item in the whole municipality, and it's not really the focus of this ordinance. So I don't really know where to go with that.
I'll just clarify my comments on recommendation number 6. That's the only one that I think I need. So. Commissioner Krishna.
I guess just to move on, I'll say I was a bit confused by number 2 and why it isn't just rolled into number 1. And maybe that's a question perhaps for staff.
Yes, number 2 affects areas outside of the hillside zoning districts. So for example, you have areas zoned R3 that are in the highest danger zone for seismic ground failure. You have areas zoned R3 and R4 in Mountain View that are in the Elmendorf airfields accident potential zone 1 and other examples. So these hazardous areas, these environmental areas are in places in the Muni in both the urban and more hillside rural areas. The goal in recommendation number 2 is that when we increase the allowed density entitlement in those areas, that as part of that ordinance making that increase, that we limit or avoid that increase in entitlement in areas where we know we would be putting more people in harm's way by voting to by consolidating, consolidate the zoning districts, increasing the density in those areas. One is hillside specific, and it was responded to information that we got through the process that some of the areas of we know greatest housing opportunity from this ordinance we believe are in, for example, the merger of the R1 and R2 areas, and that there are relatively fewer unanswered questions and issues with merging those districts than what we see on the hillside. And so the concern about the hillside is that, and recommendation 1 is that that's a piece of this that could slow down the rest of the ordinance and in the end not necessarily yield as much housing gain. And so by postponing the more difficult piece, it does allow the canoe to be a little lighter on the water and move forward for the rest of it. So that's the idea of 1. Thank you.
I just want to clarify. You're in these, like, say, seismic zone 4, 5, bunch of R3 and R4 land, or East Anchorage, Elmendorf crash zone. You're talking about limiting housing, right? That's what you meant by that? Like, we should reduce density? Just want to, like, make it real clear.
Right. So, no. No, that's not what we're saying. We have existing entitlements, and the home ordinance initiative would increase the allowed entitlement. What we're recommending is that in those areas to not increase the allowed entitlement. There are different ways to do that. You could do it without affecting the net total increase of development capacity throughout the muni. There are ways to do that. But the idea is that the entitlement for increase, like for example, the ordinance would, as we would see that the merger of the R4 and the R4A zone would take on the allowed height limit of the R4A zone in the R4. Eastern Mountain View has R4 zone in that, so that area would, as a result, increase its allowed heights in the accident potential zone 1 south of the runway. So we have 2 competing objectives there, public safety and housing. And in that area, we would recommend that those increases not take place there, but we're not recommending reducing allowed densities. Thank you.
Commissioner Krishna, then Commissioner George.
No, I think that was pretty much my question.
Commissioner George.
Thank you, through the chair. I only take exception with the words or areas with inadequate infrastructure on number 2. I don't want to see us increasing zoning density in areas that are underdeveloped. We haven't gotten around to building a road or facilities. I don't want to see us have tracts of land and just not zone them appropriately and then say, well, I guess we can't build more housing here because we haven't built the road. We used to be a community that built things. I'd like to get back to that.
Commissioner Krishna.
I'll just say, yeah, that is my major concern with number 4, which is the phrase, with improvements to the Title 21 standards. I'm not sure where that is in our community or how we determine that.
Commissioner Gardner.
Just a quick comment on number 2 as a follow-up to the staff's notes there, and I think the question that you asked, Andre, which is, it sounded like in response to your question, the concern isn't always necessarily a function of density. In some areas, it could be a function of height or other limitations or other, I guess, aspects of development. And so I think I would be interested to maybe change that to, rather than say to limit or avoid increases in allowed densities, to say something to the effect instead that it would establish code provisions in Home Initiative Title 21 text amendments to address and resolve concerns about development in areas with natural or technological hazards or critical environmental areas, or where such increases would otherwise result from the consolidation.
I'm gonna go way out on a limb here and just tell you guys something. Part of the problem with Title 21, my opinion, is that it goes too far in a lot of directions, and it tries to do too many things, and right down to the color lipstick that you want to put on your house. And that is, I think, one of the root problems why we have a lack of construction, lack of building, lack of housing. And so I'm just fearful with because what I see happening is a Title 21 rewrite. I mean, that's what we have in front of us is a partial rewrite. And assuming this goes forward into further rewrite, I guess I'm just afraid of like picking out sections and then putting special rules on there. I don't know that the land use plan is the appropriate place for it, and so I'm just fearful of more rules. So, anyhow, Commissioner Krishna.
Maybe I'll just go back to a process thing and say that I think we're identifying quite a lot of things that we might want to amend about these recommendations. I'll just say that the ones that I feel quite comfortable with, that I would just be happy with right now, are number 3, number 5, and number 7. And I think maybe just a broader statement is that these are all written quite broadly. I'm not sure that any of them are implementable as written. We could always choose to make, to treat these as broader policy guidelines rather than as specific text amendments that we are recommending be made, and move forward that way.
I mean, I think the other thing to consider here is we have like the decision-making body, or 3 sponsors of this ordinance are from the decision-making body, and we only make recommendations to them. So it's definitely an awkward spot, but I think the best thing we could do is tell them what the commission thinks, assuming we can all agree on what that is. So kudos to Commissioner Krishna for giving us 3 things that you do like, or 4, whatever the number was. Ron.
Thank you, fellow commissioners and the chair. I would like to point out that the petitioners did not appear to provide any track changes to recommendations numbers 2 and 4, so there appears to be alignment between the department and the petitioners, at least using this as my piece of evidence for those 2 items. And for that reason, I don't have interest in further revising items 2 or 4.
I see down towards the bottom of the first page, the sponsors do not concur with these planning department recommendations, 2, 4, and 6, and 8. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I saw that as well. However, I don't see track changes.
Okay, gotcha. Commissioner Winchester.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I can get to approval with staff recommendations as written.
Thank you. I don't know. Commissioner Pulis.
I'll just second Commissioner Winchester's. I think if we don't give them our concerns, they're not going to get anything. And I think all these bring up good points, not that they're correct, but if we don't pass them on, they're not going to see them.
Commissioner Ron.
I'll echo the prior two commissioners' comments and would like to hear more from the chair about his interest in recommendation 6.
Basically, I think the code needs to get rewritten, tested against actual building permits, the results published and reviewed, and then go through the process again prior to be at least a public hearing, if not before this body and then the assembly, at least at the assembly level, to allow for public comment on the results. Because what happened recently, you might remember the site access ordinance. We passed it. I remember saying, I'm not exactly sure what this is doing. And then it went to the assembly. It got tweaked a little bit more. And then when it was implemented, it did things that nobody ever expected. And so the problem is we're playing with the livelihood of every, contractor, developer, anyone doing anything that requires a Title 21 permit in this town. Like, we're kind of playing with their livelihood here, and I think we should know what it does before we make it the law of the land. And so that's the main thing for me is I've been through the process. They publish things. People get to comment on them typically. It may or may not be in a public hearing, and I just think we need to get a little further along. Commissioner Gardner.
I'm curious what your sense is too, because I could certainly see how that could be the case, and this isn't the world that I swim in, but for those amendments, there were a lot of new changes to a lot of aspects of how you look at and calculate and the requirements, et cetera, et cetera. To the extent that you can zoom out and view these as applying existing restrictions to different areas in a sense, right? Like at some level, it's not a whole new suite of things. It's existing stuff that just works in different areas, and with the intention being that it's also some of the less restrictive requirements. I'm wondering from that perspective if and to what extent that changes your view on that question you were just speaking to, if that makes sense.
So, well, I think, are you asking me how much I think this code changes things? Or
no, just with respect to the need to run it through these cycles, compare it against building permits or whatever evaluation. If what we're doing is applying existing rules and combining districts and notionally taking the least restrictive rules to a broader grouping of districts. My sense, again, someone who doesn't live and breathe this, is that shouldn't come with unexpected hurdles because it's existing structures and components and requirements. And I could easily be wrong about that. And my question is, does that align with your intuition?
So my problem is we have a plan that's going to change. Like, you have the book and it's got some 400 pages. We have a document that's only about 25 pages, but it's going to change 300 of these pages, and nobody's seen what every single one of those pages read like. And that's somewhat of a concern to me, is that when you take R1 and you change the name of it to something else, and then you insert that to everywhere R1 shows up in the book, and it's been rewritten, I just kind of want to read it before I say, yeah, that's the law of the land. And that's part of my concern with this, is just seeing it written in the book, like in the code. Because, I mean, for better or for worse, like changing R1, R2A, R2D, R2M all to something new it's kind of, I don't know, it seems kind of like a big change, even though, some of the changes are not really, I don't think that this changes code quite as much as I would like to change code. I mean, and part of my other concern is the way we arrived here. Staff has to, implement and enforce the code, and staff clearly is in opposition or not really supporting this. And so I think we have to we have to reconcile that issue somehow. Commissioner Krishna.
Just to keep us moving, it seems like maybe we are ready to leave the committee of the whole and simply vote on the motion as written. If anyone has a strong objection to that, or feels like there is an amendment to be made that you would like to talk through, this would be maybe a helpful time to state that.
Commissioner George.
Thank you. I welcome that opportunity. Before I move on too quickly, I also can sense the chair's comments are absolutely lived experience from the last rewrite of Title 21. That is absolutely hammer on the nail of what it was like going through, passing something and then going through and going, that is not what we meant. So I don't want to find us, as Yogi Berra once said, it's deja vu all over again. I wonder if, what we have before us is a staff report memo here dated June 10th that has recommendations that are approval subject to certain modifications, denial, or postpone. And it sounds like there is potentially support from the body to move the recommendations of staff, that there is maybe not unanimous consent on those, but probably overall fair bit of support. However, on the overall initiative itself, I don't know if there's that level of support. And so I wonder if it's appropriate to make a motion separately, and that's why I would like to bring this up in the committee of the whole first, to move the recommendations from the memo first, or if we want to simply move for approval subject to the conditions, and then I defer to the wisdom of the body.
For me, as long as 6 is in there, I can compromise on anything else. Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I support your emphasis on recommendation 6. It's an important one for me as well. The commission has, I think in part, wrestled with the concept around allowing by right commercial in residential. And it looks to me like the area in which that's addressed in department recommendations is just in 4, and that's in a plea to develop standards for mitigating impacts. And I'm curious if any of the other commissioners have 3. Oh, it's in 3, thank you. Does that meet muster for other commissioners? Or do we want to take another bite at the potential concern over that lever?
I have a question for staff on that one. So staff, Tom, in your presentation originally, you brought up the center point example and the rezone. I looked up the zoning, I pulled the SLs. It looks like there was 30 acres that was rezoned partially to B3SL, and the other half was rezoned to R4. But currently, all 30 acres are now B3. And at least according to the Muni zoning map, which I also learned today that isn't always correct, because I know of an R4 property that the planning department is telling us is R3, even though the GIS page says R4. So I guess my first question is regarding the west 15 acres of the Centerpoint rezone, which was your big example of the loss of a trailer park that now is a bunch of office buildings. Did the west 15 acres get subsequently rezoned to B3 later? Or is the requirement for residential still on that property?
Well, both the east and west halves, the 30 acres, were all R3, and they were a mobile home park. And my understanding is that there was at least two zoning actions. The first established a residential requirement, and then there was an amendment to that. And the first included SLs, and it could have been the subsequent one. Subsequent action took in the west half. I didn't understand that at one point in time that the west half was rezoned to R4, but then it was subsequently also rezoned into this B3SL. So I don't know the answer to your question on when the west half became B3SL. There may have been an interim period where it was rezoned to R4, and then as second pass, they just rezoned it to B3SL with the eastern half. The main experience we got out of that was that rezoning and its SLs to the B3SLs did not include a requirement to build the residential units at the same time as the commercial. And so the commercial was built, and then the residential wasn't. That's what I know. Sorry, I don't know more about that when the west half became B3SL.
Yeah, and I guess the reason I asked the question in response to your comment was I dug into it. The B3, the SL, the AO that rezoned the properties, rezoned the east half into B3SL, and the SLs follow the master plan, have a campus, front doors facing certain directions, and a few other trivial things. And then the west half was going to be R4. And then subsequently, I believe, and I don't know this, but it's currently zoned B3SL, because subsequently they came in for a rezone on the other portion later, and I'm assuming this body, I wasn't part of the action, I don't believe, rezoned that R4 to B3. And so I guess my point is that I am not afraid of building commercial buildings on residential zone land if they're gonna just sit vacant. I think development of some kind is better than no development. I also think that the world is changing and will change in the future. We're seeing a lot of housing get built in the valley. We're seeing people drive to their office much less. And we're seeing cars that drive themselves. So I don't want to kind of weigh in on this, but I don't have as big of concerns about the loss of residential land as some of my colleagues do. So that's my 2 cents on it. Just to further that note, I also see a lot of vacant office towers that I look at. They look very similar to apartment buildings. Commissioner Ron.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your lived experience and comments. On your last note, that's where I was going to jump in as well. Conceptually, to me, perhaps not as part of this, but moving forward as a separate action, that very topic, right? Bringing residential into commercial as opposed to the converse of that.
In some of the conversations with the sponsors, that was a point that was made, is we're seeing residential take place in the B3 because there's a whole heck of a lot less rules to build multifamily in the B3 than there is in the R4A, for example, or the R3A, which goes back to my previous comments on complexity of code. Commissioner George.
Thank you. Yes, just briefly on that point, I think there's a lot more reason to be concerned about bringing commercial into residential areas and giving a by right commercial entitlement than there is to giving a right to build residential in a commercial area. I'm surprised I can say this out loud, but I tend to be more in alignment with you in that I would like to see development occurring, regardless of whether we have minimum requirements for residential units, et cetera. But I think I have to defer to making sure that we protect areas that have been residential only. And when we start adding the ability to have commercial in those areas, I think we really have to have a lot of public input on that. Thank you.
I just like one more comment on the topic is when you start doing things in R1 and R2 neighborhoods, you get a lot of public testimony. When you start doing things in R4 neighborhoods, there's not a lot of public outrage. And so it is kind of a slippery slope that it's where the Planning and Zoning Commission really, or the Assembly or whoever it may be, needs to think about it a bit more, because you won't hear the population of Anchorage's renters coming down here to tell us that they don't want, I don't know, a McDonald's in their neighborhood or something. I don't know. Commissioner Ron.
Move to come out of the committee of the whole.
We have a motion to leave the committee of the whole. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Strike. Any objection? Hearing none, we are out of the committee of the whole. What is the will of the body? So if anybody thinks they're ready to make a motion, they could probably maybe just say it verbally. Commissioner Krishna.
In the matter of case 2024-0006, Title 21 Text Amendments, the Home Initiative, I move to recommend approval subject to staff's recommendations on pages 1 and 2 of our supplementary recommendation staff report memorandum.
Okay, there is a motion on the table. Is there a second? Shopping for a second. Commissioner Krishna, motion is seconded by Commissioner Gardner. Will you like to speak to the motion?
Sure, I intend to support the motion. It might be helpful for any commissioners to make reference to the findings of fact that we were also given, if anyone else would like to chime in. I do believe that the recommendations include the broad categories of all of the concerns that were brought up over our multiple work sessions. I'm not sure that we have the ability to get this one perfect, but I think that we've certainly had quite a few months and a lot of public input and a lot of deliberation on the part of this body, and I'm comfortable with where we end up and intend to support the motion.
Anybody else wishing to speak to the motion? Commissioner Pullis.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add the recommended finding of fact number 6. The Home Initiative Public Hearing Draft Title 21 text amendments may lead to conversion of lots currently zoned for multifamily residential to zoning designations that allow for commercial-only development without any requirement to provide residences or limit on the intensity of the commercial uses throughout the medium and high-density multifamily neighborhoods. There is concern that permitting commercial-only entitlements on land currently zoned for multifamily residential could result in displacement of existing households, higher costs of renting or purchasing a home, greater land acquisition costs for home builders, and loss of multifamily zone land supply, all of which counteract the goal of boosting housing supply and decreasing housing costs in Anchorage.
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd first like to confirm my understanding of the motion, and while it states recommendations on pages 1 and 2 of the supplementary staff report, I'd like to make sure that it's recommendations 1 through 8 on pages 2 of the staff, 1 and 2 of the staff report, just to clear up any potential lack of clarity therein. I intend to support the motion. I would like to speak briefly to Department's finding number 12 on page 3 of the draft findings of fact. My understanding is there's still misalignment between the petitioners and the department on whether or not this constitutes a rezone. It's fundamental to, I think, the positions taken by both of those parties in this case, and has influenced kind of how we've developed to where we are today. Where I'm at with the evidence that I've seen, I'm in agreement with staff's finding of fact, item number 12. So for the record, that the Home Initiative does indeed constitute a rezoning, and as such, that firms up my support of the department's recommendations that speak to those, or that issue as well. So that's it for now. Thanks.
I also intend to support the motion, and I am looking at the findings, staff findings 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8 that I'd add to the record. Seeing no, Commissioner George.
Sorry about that. There are quite a few findings here, and I echo the previous findings as well about the nature of the rezoning as well. There were some items that came up throughout the deliberations about the noticing and that sort of thing. You know, we did have 2023-87 referred to us. We had an S version and we had revised sponsors versions. We've had staff memos, revised staff memos, additional supplementary memos, joint memos, and much of it after the public process had closed. Now, I understand that folks will have a chance before the full assembly, but in the interest of public process and the question of whether something has been publicly noticed, it would be my preference to have something this comprehensive referred to us by that body. And so I have questions about what exactly was referred to us for public notice. When someone goes online to the online system, what is it they see that they can publicly comment on it? And it is AO 2023-87. So that's my concern. Another finding is there's questions about the minimum number of units by right on all residential lots. There were documents we were provided with previously about asking us to make questions of policy about in the staff report at one point, there was a question about why don't we go up to 4 units per residential lot. I'm unable to make a finding as to the appropriate number of residential lots, residential units per lot. That is a higher level policy question that I think needs an area-wide input. And then, again, as I mentioned earlier, I would find it inappropriate to amend district and neighborhood plans without some kind of notice or input or consent of those neighborhoods. One of the recommendations is to make those neighborhood plans comport with the initiative. I think that's perhaps backwards. Additionally, I would also find that the nature of the initiative itself and a lot of the questions that we're having and a lot of the issues that we're having as a community, I think it's appropriate that the larger question of whether we have a complete 20-year plan review is in order. So with those concerns laid out, while I do support many of the recommendations, and I recognize all the hard work by staff, I'm not going to eulogize this initiative by any means. I would like to see it come back before us in a complete version, something that we can look at that's not just 25 or 30 pages, but until that time, I'm unable to support the overall initiative. Thank you.
Call for the vote.
Ms. Eber, how do you vote?
No.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That motion passes.
Brandy, Daniel.
Okay. What do you guys want to talk about now?
Would it be in order to reconsider the postponement of the previous item? The one that was postponed?
If it's the will of the body, I'm just here to conduct traffic. We have staff in the queue. Mr. Davis?
Apologies, I canceled my request to speak. I should have knocked that off a bit ago.
Mr. Poggiano?
Yeah, well, if I may give a little information on the question about reconsidering the previous motion. The code doesn't impose the 60-day time limit on this body for when it's reviewing comprehensive plan amendments, the way it does for text amendments and rezoning. So you are not under a clock on that one. However, there may be legal issues if the comprehensive plan is not amended by the time if the assembly were to enact the home initiative and official land use planning map changes without a amendment to the comprehensive plan to maintain consistency.
If the assembly chose to, could they approve the comprehensive plan amendment without this body?
Yes, they could. I think they have the power to do that. The code says that they should receive the recommendation of this body first, but I would say that they do have the power to go ahead and act on it as the legislative body of this municipality.
So it's a should, not a shall?
You're getting into some important and somewhat complicated and unresolved legal areas in the state of Alaska. The opinion of the municipal attorney's office is that the assembly, like the administration, should follow the code as written or change it. So speaking on the behalf of the municipal attorney's office, the assembly should follow the procedures written in code until such time as they change them, would be our perspective. Is it overtly illegal if they don't? I don't think that, I would say the answer is unclear under Alaska law.
Thank you. So,
It was included in the first case, yeah. So what do we?
Commissioner Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I heard another commissioner ask a question about the status of the recommendations in that postponement case, and my understanding as I worded the motion was that those recommendations were incorporated as guidance. So my intention in making the motion as such was that if the petitioners chose to move forward in the direction laid out by those recommendations, they're there for guidance for them to do so, and would hopefully inform the product that we see coming back to us.
Is there anything else you guys want to do, or should we have a motion to adjourn?
Okay.
Commissioner George.
I just want to leave us with a little kernel of wisdom for, before we adjourn here. I don't want to keep us too late, but the public process is something that can be waived. Should it be? I don't think so, but I'm not elected to the assembly or some other body that gets to make those decisions. It is, to quote the assembly, waiving planning and zoning commission review is the purview of the Home Rule Municipal Assembly. However, the planning and zoning commission is created in the charter. And according to the charter, Bill of Rights, residents have the right to a locally directed ongoing planning process that is based upon the community's goals, objectives, and policies for the future. So I hope that we are doing our job well enough that our assembly and our local government entrusts us with planning and zoning cases in the future. And I hope that we can continue to function appropriately. Thank you.
I got to make a comment now. So the home initiative, housing equity for everybody, something along those lines. I find it pretty ironic that small single-family houses and multifamily housing are the only buildings in Anchorage that have design standards. Commercial buildings, large lot, residential, no design standards for those guys. It's mainly the workforce housing and the smaller housing that we have design standards. Design standards cost money, they increase housing costs, and they slow down permitting. And so if the assembly in its infinite wisdom decided to remove design standards, I think it would make housing more equitable for everybody in Anchorage. That's my comment. Ms. Bojano.
Yes, I was just speaking with one of the sponsors, and sorry for the late question, but I think their question is worthwhile. They would like to know, on the postponement of the comprehensive plan case, is this body asking the sponsors to come back to you by a certain date, or are you more, you have, with your action to postpone, your main goal is to send along the recommendations attached to that with no dates, no deadlines? Can we offer them any clarity?
Anybody wishing to answer that question? Commissioner Ron.
Thank you. Through the chair. My perspective on that is that, as we just heard, there may be some space created based on the commission's action tonight to postpone the comp plan, but move forward with approval with the Title 21 text amendments. And so there's an implementation gap, perhaps, in legal space. So I'm of the mind that whatever time is necessary for the petitioners to resolve the issues for the comp plan and enable proper implementation, to that's the timing for me that I think we should. I can't pick a date out of thin air for what they need and that necessary to get that work done. That's where I'm at with it, but interested in thoughts by others.
If I may, to try to clarify, could any members of this body speak to whether you would want to see the comprehensive plan case back before this body?
If I may, I think that's evident in the recommendation, right? To number 6 or 7, whatever it was, provide a more completed version of the public hearing draft.
I think the question is specifically to the comprehensive plan, the 67. And I think it would be better if some of the members of the commission said what they thought rather than hearing my thought.
Sounds good.
You're the only one laughing here.
But again, for the record, recommendation 7 in that case is to provide a revised, more complete version of the public hearing draft home initiative comprehensive plan amendment for review by the commission and public prior to final consideration.
So that would be a yes. The commissioners do think that it should come back.
She can't do that, she needs to be on recording.
There was a question from the crowd about how it might come back. Staff, could this case come back before us with a new staff packet or an additional staff packet? Can you answer that?
Yes, it could. There could be revisions recommended to the commission, recommended to the public hearing draft, a revised version brought back that addresses the recommendations, and so that the postponement would be to carry out the process to create that revised public hearing draft, bring it back to the commission. It doesn't estimate a date, but it provides guidance of what would be the commission would like to see happen.
I'd imagine we would probably want to reopen the public hearing, but would we need to specify that also? Or would that just be a given or no?
The recommendation in 7 is to Yeah. Excuse me. The language in the recommendation isn't clear, but it's reviewed by the commission in public prior to final consideration. So the commission could decide to reopen the public hearing for that when it receives the plan, the revised plan, sorry.
Commissioner Krishna.
I'm not sure if this is a particularly helpful comment, but I think at this point, I might just add that a recommendation can be taken or left. And I'm perfectly content with where we have left our process at this point, which was to provide the recommendations that we were able to the best of our abilities at the end of the public process that we were given. I would argue not the one we would have chosen. And if the recommendations that we have provided don't leave themselves to be internally consistent or particularly implementable, then I would leave that to either staff or to the sponsors to do with what they will.
Commissioner George,
Move to adjourn?
is there a second?
I was still typing. Just a second.
All righty. Motion to adjourn. Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned.